Please welcome on stage Ian Miers from Aleo. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. So this is going to be a slightly less technical talk. My name is Ian Miers. I'm the lead research scientist at Aleo. I'm a professor at the University of Maryland. And before that, I was also the co-inventor of Zcash. In fact, this was the first paper in my PhD dissertation. And the reason this is going to be a slightly less technical talk is this is a talk nominally on Aleo and about how you build privacy-preserving smart contracts. And I figured I'd go through the technical bits of how this works and why. But it turns out the more interesting thing, I think, in my mind is the why. Like, you know, why do you build a privacy-preserving smart contract system? Why are you even using SNARKs? And once you figure that out, I'm not going to say the technical details are easy, but you can derive them from first principles. But it is really sort of the why that's the hard bit, and you can make a lot of bad technical decisions if you don't have the why nailed down. And this is kind of interesting because, you know, started out with this thinking it would be easy, right? In 2013 and 2014, I started getting into cryptocurrency. And I was like, well, this Bitcoin thing, it has a serious privacy problem. Let's go fix this. And so let's start looking at first how to use zero-knowledge proofs for blockchains. And then the first papers on how to use zkSNARKs for blockchain. This is a paper called Zcash to make Bitcoin private. Of course, we then went and launched Zcash in 2016, hired Zuko to run the company, and that was that, except at about the same time Ethereum launched. And so as an academic, as a grad student, I'm sitting thinking, okay, well, we solved the Bitcoin privacy problem, right? Oh, naive me from an academic standpoint, solved. But what's next? Well, there's this Ethereum thing. Surely it can't be that hard to make Ethereum private. So let's go do that. So that was late 2016, early 2017 when we started that paper. It's a thing called zkSNARKs. So the subset of the authors off of Zcash, plus a couple of new people, including Howard, who is the CEO of, now Provable, the company that built Aleo. You know, like this couldn't possibly be that bad. Took us some 3 years to write the paper. Aleo is now launching about August this year. Spoilers, it was in fact entirely that bad. It turns out that the problem with this is figuring out what you need to do. Right? It's not a question of making the SNARKs work, that's annoying. It's not a question of making the security proofs go through, that's also annoying. It really is what is the functionality you're trying to build? What is the real goal here? Which is a thing we struggled with conceptually for a while. Right? The starting point of all this, again, was Bitcoin is not public. You don't want Bitcoin to be, you don't get data to be public. You can't have Twitter for your bank account. Cryptocurrency exposes everything to everybody. And so that's a very simple thing to say in payments. And I still think it's true. But it's harder to say for smart contracts. And in fact, it's also harder to say for cryptocurrency in general, because the reality of the matter is, well, this technology has gone on to have an immense amount of impact being used in other protocols, right? And basically everybody who's building privacy-preserving protocols now uses exactly these kind of techniques that we developed. Mixed and matched with other things, new zero-knowledge proof, different accumulator schemes, but it's the core protocols there. They don't always cite the right sources for this. Sometimes that annoys me. Sometimes I'm kind of happy that I didn't get cited for things, because like, that would be awkward. But nonetheless, this is what these are all doing. It's a nice intellectual way to see it's amazing technology. But if we're talking about this, we got to be honest that, at least for the ones that have launched, they haven't been like roaring commercial successes, right? They're there, they're out there, but they're not like, you know, the 5th best cryptocurrency in the world. And it really just sort of is at some level commercially disappointing. And so my colleague Ron Trummer, one of the original co-authors and co-inventor of Zcash, had this description of it very aptly, which is that selling privacy for blockchains is like selling seatbelts for cars in the 1920s. But what he means is, it's clear that if cars take off, at some point in the future, it would be highways going at really high speeds, and you're going to want safety features. But in 1920, nobody cares. You're not going to convince people to buy a car with airbags or ABS brakes or anything like that. So it's not really possible to sell people on safety features. right? So at some level, Zcash was too soon. But the more I thought about this, this is really even later, right? Like, ignoring the timing, not everybody, like, who buys a car wants to drive it. It's a little weird to think about, but, some people buy them as collectibles, right? They just stick them in garages and let the value appreciate, right? So Bitcoin, in this analogy, might well be a garage full of collectible DeLoreans, right? They're underpowered, they don't drive very fast, they have some rust problems, but they're cool and people like them. It's totally fine. Meanwhile, on the other hand, there really is still, in 1920 and now, a demand for transportation, or a demand for financing and money that actually exists. It just might not be the same thing, right? And we've sort of started to see this now with cryptocurrency, where there's a huge growth in stablecoins. And I think this really makes a big difference between 2014, 2016, and now. We have stablecoins that exist, and people are talking about sending real money. The thing with that is, when it's actual money being transacted for actual real goods and services, privacy starts becoming more of a problem. We're now getting anecdotes of people doing things like running payroll services on a blockchain. You pay 3 contractors, and one of the contractors looks back and goes, hey, why am I getting more money, less money than the other guy? This was a hypothetical 5-10 years ago. Now it's an anecdote. Still anecdote, singular, but happened. More generally, though, right, let's put this in perspective. Cryptocurrency is, these are transaction volumes. Instead of doing transaction volumes instead of market cap, because everybody does market caps. Rather shoddily collected, but, Bitcoin has a volume of like maybe $30 billion last night, this morning. Ethereum might have been 17 billion. These will all give or take on whatever source I pulled the data from. But like, in contrast, like PayPal does $4 billion a day. Visa does 30. The global stock market, apparently, depending on how you estimate this, I have no idea, is $350 billion. Point being, there is a much larger market for this kind of technology that just exists in cryptocurrency. And that market is going to need privacy. It's going to need SNARKs, not just for privacy, but for better control of your money. And so this talk is really about how and why of that. And then, as I said, the technology follows through. I will get into what Aleo is technically at the end, not in the details of going over oblivious transfer. I have to say that's a very impressive thing to try to cover for a mixed audience. I would not try that for an undergraduate class, so congratulations on getting that talk done. So this talk, however, is going to cover sort of 4 different points. The first one is a way to think about what ZK proofs are doing, and it's not just privacy. It's about giving you control of your data, your money, and where it goes. And so this is going to be a nice to have on a normal blockchain, Bitcoin, Zcash, et cetera, but it's essential when you start thinking about large amounts of money in a broader financial system. And this is not just going to be about protecting your privacy and not doing Twitter for your bank account. It's going to be about better controlling where your money goes and securing it. Because it turns out you can use ZK proofs to avoid a bunch of the problems you just saw earlier of doing threshold signatures, or crazy MPC schemes, or HSMs trying to secure keys. Because you can all do all that on chain if only it was cheap enough. So that's point 1. Second point is that a lot of people here talk about zkVMs and ZK rollups, and these are great, but they get frequently confused with actual things that use zero-knowledge proofs. The ZK rollups don't. They aren't even ZK, and they don't do any of this. I'll just make that point clearer later. Excuse me. And then sort of fundamental, and this is one of the things that, taking 3 years to write a paper and 4 or 5 years to go to blockchain, you can't add on ZK late. You sort of have to build it in fundamentally from the start. And if you don't get that right, it's going to be a pain. And this comes up in context of everyone's talking about, do you build on Ethereum, do you build on Solana, do you build on other blockchains? It doesn't entirely matter, because all of these things are going to the point where they're being interconnected. What you have to do is get the fundamentals right. And that's going to be a lot harder to do if you're stuck on someone else's chain, with someone else's curves, and someone else's tech stack. And then, lastly, I'll give you literally the sort of 3-slide summary of Aleo, because it sort of falls out from all of this. So the biggest thing that I would probably like everyone to take away on a technical level, in terms of thinking about this, is ZK proofs aren't just a tool for privacy, they aren't just a tool for scalability, they're a tool for letting you control your data in multiple different ways, right? So which world would you prefer? World A, you have money. An attacker must hack 3 of 5 HSMs to get your funds. The HSMs may be running an MPC protocol, they may be doing threshold, whatever. They may not even be HSMs, but an attacker has to hack 3 of these 5 things, or 4 of these 5 things, some threshold key event. World B, attacker has to hack the entire Ethereum blockchain to get your money. Show of hands. Which world would you want to be? Who wants to be in world A? Who wants to sell you technology to be in? Okay, don't raise your hand for that. But all right, we all want to be in world B, right? Like, it would be better if you had to hack every single node of Ethereum, right? That should be doable in principle from like a first principles computer science perspective. It's a blockchain. It's a blockchain with smart contracts. You can write smart contracts to embed any authorization logic you want. But of course, nobody does this. That's why there's a whole market for threshold signatures and all this other stuff. Because nobody can afford to do that, right? If you're an institution, you can't have a smart contract for every single transaction you make if you're, say, Coinbase or Kraken or somebody. It's too expensive, right? They're also difficult to program. That's a separate point. If you really did this, and you put like full authorization logic, you'd have all of your sensitive information about who has to authorize what the volumes are on chain for anybody to see. So that's also a problem. And these are maybe acceptable or minor, depending on how you view them, for existing blockchains. But again, if you're looking at growing this to like larger portions of the world's financial system, that's not going to work so well. So this just gets worse and worse. Right? And the thing is that if you have a ZK proof system, you can remove this dilemma. Because zkSNARKs, in addition to being zero knowledge, are succinct. Any programming logic you describe for the right value of a snark is verified in the same amount of time. Right? So you can have a very complicated program that has crazy logic for authorizing your transactions, and it's going to cost the same as a simple transaction. If you're using something like Graph 16 with totally succinct verification. And so in this case, your security logic is free. You don't have to worry about how much it costs you on chain, or what the gas fees are, or how long you have to wait. Assuming it's reasonable enough to prove in your infrastructure. Okay, you can always pay for more infrastructure. You get whatever security you want, but it's enforced by the whole blockchain. You no longer have to deal with, I have 3 or 7 servers over here running some best of protocol doing custom policy logic. You can write that in a smart contract and get security to the entire blockchain. So that is useful conceptually. You can do this to do various things, right? You can build automated naughty and nice lists. You can do compliance tools for where money goes. You want to require identity. You can do protocols like privacy tools. Right? You can build these things so that you can deal with stolen funds, because the reality of the matter is, even if you're in either of these worlds, you're going to have mistakes. Money is going to get stolen, right? Money gets stolen in the traditional finance system, and you have to have means to limit it. And so these kind of features are useful for this. This is like, for example, privacy tools, just interesting stuff here. And you can build these kind of things if you have programmable zero knowledge. You can similarly imagine one major thing that's coming up now for stablecoins, and frankly, just privacy coins in general, is you have to deal with compliance. Right? There has to be some story you have of what's going on, and it's not clear which story's right. What regulators are going to let you do, which regulators are going to like what, or what's going to win in the market. And there are a bunch of different options you can come up with, ranging from, we're going to have no compliance whatsoever, like from an arrow approach. You can have KYC in the on and off ramps. Zcash did to start. You could have KYC in every transaction, wanting to build it that way. Or you could try to build in some kind of global God's eye view key to show everything. This is a terrible idea. You should not do it. But a number of people are building systems to try. And the thing is, if you have a platform that does zk smart contracts, you don't have to build a separate L1 for each one of these. You can just have various people building these as stablecoins, and you can let the market, God, and Darwin sort it out. So it's a valuable utility there to solve, well, to outsource solving some of these hard problems of like, what do you do, how do you enforce these things? Right, so that's the idea of why do you want zero knowledge. It's to give you privacy, it's to give you control and better security. Like seriously, you can write better secure programs if you don't worry about the gas costs and just run them locally, and it's proof you did on chain. That's a lot better than messing around with a PE or some threshold signature library. Right, so that's great. So talk's over, we can all just go invest in whatever zkVM you're thinking of, right? ZK does not mean a ZK rollup. This is an unfortunate side effect of branding, where everybody who's doing these rollups has rebranded themselves as, hi, or zero knowledge. Except, well, first of all, if you haven't seen this before, right, the general idea is blockchains are slow, and so the story is zero knowledge proofs are supposed to help them scale. So zkVMs are supposed to be everything a growing blockchain needs. The problem is they literally are not zero knowledge proofs. right? Like, if you look at companies like zkSNARK and Starkware, literally, the proofs, they started out in some cases being zero knowledge, they literally dropped that off for efficiency reasons. Right? It was simpler for the go-to-market strategy, and to get performance, they wanted to not have zero knowledge systems. What this means is a couple of things. First of all, in many of these settings, all the data is public anyway, everyone can see it. Second of all, you can figure out what's going on. But it's just a pain, right? And I don't want to malign these things, because the people working here are doing amazing work, right? The techniques are useful. In fact, they're useful for building actual zero knowledge proofs. But they aren't themselves zero knowledge proofs. They don't get you to these kind of applications. And the way I look at this is kind of like the 80s and the 90s, right? When people were building computer processors, originally to do spreadsheets, right? Like punch cards, counting and stuff. And people nerded out on building better processors. And you needed those, and they needed to happen, and that was fine for a motivating case. But other people went on to build the internet, right? You got to build more interesting things with this than just a simple scaling solution. So this stuff is really useful, and this keeps paying dividends. Like, as a researcher, there are things now that I can write papers on that I could not 5 years ago because proof systems simply weren't that fast. And a lot of that's come from the zkVM research and the work on scaling and hardware acceleration. But nonetheless, these things aren't zero knowledge, and that's going to cause some nasty problems for people if they deploy them. So if you haven't seen this before, right? zk rollup, you have a rollup operator as a server. People claim they're going to decentralize it, but this operator takes a bunch of transactions, it compresses them down into a single blob, and it produces a single zk proof of the value. The idea being it's faster to check that proof than it is to check every transaction individually, so the transactions pay lower gas fees. These things sit off to the blockchain to verify. And that's all nice and good, except the server sees all of the transactions. Because again, you have to send them to the server is the person doing the proof. Right? Proof isn't even zero knowledge, but it doesn't matter here. Server's seeing everything. So this has a couple of immediate consequences. You can see everything, which means you can decide what you want to include and exclude. And that's going to cause you some problems, because you might at some point be held responsible for what you might not have excluded. So you better not mint NFTs of some memes that the government hates. You also maybe don't want to start minting NFTs that say commit problems for trademarks that like zkSNARK tried to get for zk. That'd be a hilarious way to troll them, by the way. Generally, if you were a rollup and you're running this, sooner or later, if you get real transactions, like real actual out-the-world financial transactions, you're going to run into a dumpster fire, because you're going to be the one processing all of this data in a rather centralized environment. And so this is just, frankly, a hilarious problem, right? It's like, I'm going to have a rollup, I'm going to say it's zk, everyone's going to send me all my transactions, and, well, you're going to run into this problem. So this is amusing or ironic or whatever in a blockchain context, but again, if you're trying to grow cryptocurrency to be a larger market with more applications and more money in it, it's going to be even worse. So at some point, a while ago, Zcash had a partnership with JP Morgan long ago. Went nowhere, but they were building this thing called Cora. They were trying to add privacy into it. And at some point, I got a quote from one of the executives there, which was, you don't want to KYC your customer's customer. Right? This is the thing that banks just don't want to deal with. Right? It causes them immense amounts of problems and worries. And the thing is, and if you're in a public blockchain where all that data is visible to you, it's a real problem. Right? That's not an obligation to the current financial regulations. It's not one they want to be subject to, but nonetheless, it's a concern they have. And so, if that's your thinking of blockchains, they're not going to end up in this position where they want to see everything. It's just not viable in these kind of systems. Right? You want to know who you're transacting with and have done your due diligence, but nothing else. Right? The other problem here is, just as a point, this technology is not necessarily going to transfer. So there are a bunch of zkVMs that people built, they're very good, but you can't easily just turn it into a zero knowledge proof for privacy or control of your own data, because those need to run on your own devices, right? If you don't want to expose your data to a third party, you need to make the proof yourself. If you want to be the one authorizing your own transaction and not relying on three things running ECDSA with a broken OT protocol for thresholds, you need to do this yourself. And the thing is that those zero knowledge proofs that have been developed don't quite work in that setting. They're architected typically for data centers. They're built in systems that cost must be amortized over many transactions. And in general, there's a trade-off in designing any kind of system, particularly cryptographic ones for throughput versus latency, right? These things are typically optimized for throughput and don't care about memory usage. So it's not necessarily the case that you can just say, oh, I have a ZK rollup, now I'll turn the ZK back on and make people submit these on their own. That's not going to quite work. Or maybe it will. To be fair, time's too soon to tell, but you might end up with a thing where it's sort of akin to the difference between like Intel x86 and ARM, right? Where everybody uses Intel servers for chips for servers, but they have not tried to, they might want to be able to get on Detect that runs on phones because that's just not what it's architected for. So you may well end up there. Lastly, having gone down this road a couple of times, rollups are a pile of technical debt. Right? So if you're writing a rollup, you're stuck running on somebody else's chain with somebody else's curves, somebody else's logic that you have to build your like Merkle tree verification in, which turns out to be horrendously expensive if you're doing Ethereum. And you end up with a design that is very tightly coupled to the L1 you're on that you don't control. And so you're going to have a bunch of problems with building it. You're going to have a bunch of things you've got to get over. And then the final problem, which maybe is the other lesson you should take, these things are going to have to upgrade. Right? Everybody in this entire space talks about how they have the best zero-knowledge proof. Halo, bulletproofs, TurboPlonk, UberPlonk, whatever, there's a whole cottage industry of inventing names for these things. And having been in this space for over 10 years now, I can tell you, the run rule of ZK proofs for blockchains is there is always a better ZK proof for a blockchain. It's actually amazing. It means we get better stuff and we do more and cooler things. But if you're these guys over here who raised off of we have the world's best zero-knowledge proof and need no other, and then you built your system as if you actually believe that, you're going to run into a real problem in 2 years when your tightly coupled thing built into an L1 can't switch or can't adapt. And that is a real problem that a lot of these people are going to run into. Because there is always a better zero-knowledge proof. And this is a good thing. This means we get progress as an industry, we get progress as a research community. But it does mean you really should be planning for that. A lot of them aren't. Right. So, second to last point, right? The future of all of this is sort of interconnected blockchains. You're going to have multiple blockchains with multiple different parties and bridges between them. And it's tempting to think, well, okay, we all just build on Ethereum or Solana or whatever it is, and that's the thing that matters. But no, right? If you try to build on top of those, right, and you're trying to get ZK built in from the ground up, that's going to be really painful. Right? It's just incredibly difficult to architect correctly. You have to get the programming model right, you have to get the fee model right. Like, privacy fees are hard to do if you didn't build them in. You have to figure out how to get composability and privacy working, public and private transactions. These things are all hard. Aleo screwed each one of them up at least once. Actually, you should go have fun with it on launches. Some of these things work perfectly. Some of them are no awkward workarounds. But if you get that right, or even mostly right, it's going to be a lot simpler to then add a rollup or then add a scalability solution on top of what you have, right? Because you've got the basics, you've got the control, you've got the stuff, assuming it happens on a consumer device. And then you can like batch the zero-knowledge proofs. You can easily recurse them into another proof. This is not the largest problem, right? And in particular, right, like if you're trying to grow the market to larger applications of traditional finance, you're also not in this zero-sum game of competing with liquidity on other chains, right? So this will work. The last point here, though, is an interesting question, right? Do you build, when you build this, do you build a system that uses your own programming language or some other model, or do you try to get compatibility with EVM? There are two schools of thought here, and I would say it's not a priori clue here is right, and I'm not going to come out here and give you an opinion on this, right? One of them is everyone loves Solidity, and so if you're building a new chain, you should use that because that's what programming rules know, and you build a zkVM. The other school of thought is if cryptocurrency grows, it will be from outside devs, right? And the majority of devs don't know Solidity, they know JavaScript or Python or Java. And so you don't really have to worry about this if you're trying to grow it to larger markets. Reality for right now, at least for the next couple of years, however, is you don't necessarily get a choice because none of the ZK VMs, right now at least, are going to work very well on mobile. So if you're trying to do consumer payments or controlling your own money and not a rollup, it's going to be a much heavier lift. And so that will bias your choice towards the second model, which is don't do it. So with about 5 minutes left, I guess coming back to this, right? If you're trying to grow all of this out to a large, like a larger financial ecosystem, I think you're going to need zero-knowledge proofs here, right? You're going to need them for privacy. You can't have Twitter for your bank account. I've been saying that for 10 years. It didn't apply to Bitcoin, fine, but like, seriously, you can't have Twitter for your bank account. But you also need better security control, and ZK is a good way to do that. Because then you're in control of your data, you're in control of what you can program yourself. You don't have to rely on these sort of hacking mechanisms for getting virtual signatures. But the flip side of that is, just to be obvious, if you are sitting over here in cryptocurrency land, and you're just trying to be the next Bitcoin or Solana or whatever it is, you don't necessarily need zero knowledge, right? Twitter for your bank account manifestly works fine enough for Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin's doing just fine now. And I mention this because one of the fundamental things with zero knowledge proofs is they're hard, right? You can build decent tooling for them, and I think actually when we get to run Aleo bid, you will play with it, hopefully you'll find that the tool is actually quite nice, but conceptually it's a leap, right? And if you just want to do standard things on Ethereum or Bitcoin or whatever, and you don't have to take that leap, you're not going to, because even if it's like easy, it's still slightly harder, right? It's slightly different. But if you want to grow stuff out to larger markets, that's a different problem. You are going to have to learn this. Right, so with that, I guess I'll give you the brief summary of, okay, what is Aleo? How's it built? Right, so Aleo, in roughly one slide, is a version of basically Zcash plus private Ethereum, right? So it's privacy preserving smart contracts using zkSNARKs. That's the concept. Consensus-wise, it is an all-world bullish fork, so similar to Sui Aptos. It has some amusing tweaks in there to make leader elections smoother. My understanding is that for Aptos and Sui, they actually basically have to stop the world every 24 hours and switch from one set of validators to another, because that consensus algorithm originally came out of Facebook, which was originally building a permission system. So there's that tweak. Target, so about 5-second block times. The proof language you write programs in is Leo, which is sort of JS Rust-like. It's used for both public and private computation. The ZK proof system is Varuna, which if you haven't heard of, it's fine. It is an R1CS-based proof system with lookup tables. It has a universal setup, and it's a derivative of Marlin, which is a paper done by Alexander Zephyr, Mishra, and others at Eurocrypt 2020. It's a published academic work. And the reason for that, this is a little interesting, most people using like Plonk-like systems, is R1CS is easier to write programming and tooling for, right? Yes, in Plonk you can write these crazy custom gates and do stuff, but it's a lot harder to figure out how to use them when you're trying to provide generic tooling. How you incorporate that is hard. So one of the early decisions that Howard and the Producer Company made was not to do that and to use this. And that is proving at least useful to us. So Aleo supports both private and public contracts. In fact, we have tokens with logic defined in both. And getting that to work right is actually one of the trickier things in the programming model. And it is written to support upgraded proving systems. So this is the language. You should all go play with it. It's a nice thing, play.leo-lane.org, which is a browser-based thing. You don't have to download stuff. I can talk about the features of it, but it's easier for you to play with it, figure out if you like it or if I'm full of it. Programs look like this. You get if statements, you get for loops. You don't get unbounded for loops. This whole thing compiles down when you take Leo to a thing called the Aleo virtual machine that is the intermediate representation between R1CS and Leo. It is, however, still circuit-based. Right? So this is a nice compile optimization, but it's not like a VM with a memory structure. Programs are stored on chain in a compiled format, so you don't have to worry about correspondence between the code and the program. And all of this stuff just works. You can go play with it. Again, you should do that. And so with that, I would just leave you again with this thought of like, look, if you're trying to build blockchains for larger things than just cryptocurrency, you're going to need better tools than what we have, right? You can't have everything be Twitter for your crypto account. You can't have all the data be public. And you need better security, right? I haven't talked to this that much, but like cryptocurrency is a theft problem, right? And that sometimes intersects very poorly with the privacy guarantees that you try to give it. And those both need to be solved. And ZK proofs are a very good tool for both of them because they let you do whatever logic you want to control your data and what's going on your own device and not outsourcing it to some third-party rollup operator who's going to get in trouble for having it. So thank you.
I think we have time for one or two questions.
Sure. It's about like 5 seconds on a nice beefy laptop. Prove, it's a little hard to measure these things, but like something a little more complex than the basic transaction, but not something insanely complicated.
Like something like Uniswap swap or something like this in 3 seconds?
Yes, though, no, obviously, Uniswap itself is kind of impossible to do in ZK because you need actual public data. That's why I said the model's hard, but yes, that would fall into the category of simple.
Yeah.
With the language Leo have created, does this mean that compiles down to R1CS? The whole program that you have written is generating proof of it? Or
Yes.
you can specify a specific part of it?
No, it's the whole program.
So, the follow-up maybe. What are some design choices of the language? Like, I briefly saw it like a blueprint class, like a class of it.
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, like what are some design choices like that we ended up like in this language?
So this is a good question. Unfortunately, it's not a good question for me because I happen to hate designing languages, so I had nothing to do with this. Avowed. Like they're like, do you want to help with this? I'm like, no, I don't like PL people. I'm not doing that.
Any more questions, guys? Okay. Thank you, Ian.